Pakistan has a history of cleansing Afghans from its country. In 2015, about 100,000 Afghans were expelled from Pakistan and sent back to the live war they just escaped from. In 2016, 600,000 were expunged, and just last month, Pakistan threatened to deport 1.7 million back to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Many of these people had recently escaped persecution for the misdemeanor of working for the previous regime. It's a terrible situation, so why does this keep happening? Before I go into the reasons, I do want to acknowledge the plight of the Afghan refugees. In 2015, when the situation wasn't nearly as bad as it is today, a Human Rights Watch report told the story of Karim, an undocumented Afghan refugee who escaped the Soviet invasion in 1985. He lived in fear for the day he finally ran out of money to bribe Pakistan's police, for they will kill me. His family didn't go outside for fear of raids. They didn't go outside much to school. They suffered the abuses from the authorities, but this was deemed preferable to returning to Afghanistan, where the Taliban resided. So what's the motivation behind this? Well, firstly, we need to understand that Pakistan, especially in the West, has a lot of Afghans, more specifically the Pashtuns, the same ethnic group the Taliban come from. Many of them arrived just after the Soviets invaded in the 70s and 80s. There was another huge swell decades later when the Taliban finally took over, and then a decade after that when the Americans invaded, and then another huge swell more recently when the Taliban took over again a few years ago. Right now, there's about 4 million foreigners in Pakistan. 3.8 million of them are Afghan. We also need to understand that there is great enmity between the two countries. This started early. This border between the two countries, known as the Durand Line, was drawn by the British Empire in 1893 to limit Afghanistan's sphere of influence, which was reaffirmed when Afghanistan lost the 1990 war against the British Empire. Later, Afghanistan was the only country to vote against admitting Pakistan to the United Nations in 1947, for they believed the ethnic Pashtuns, who lived primarily in the northeast of Afghanistan and in the western regions of Pakistan, needed an independent state. And if this couldn't happen, of course it would be best if they were to be administered by Afghanistan. Since then, it's been Afghanistan's geostrategic goal to support separatist movement in Pakistan, which involved in the 1950s supporting Mirza Ali Khan in the Pashtun independence movement, and today it means supporting the Pashtun and Palestinian Taliban. On the Pakistani side, during the 80s, the time of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, it was Pakistan's turn to use the Pashtuns, training the Mujahideen insurgent groups to fight the Soviet Union, gaining leverage over Afghanistan. This would continue to the American occupation, but when the Taliban took power in 2021, Pakistan expected the Taliban to repay them for all the decades of help by at least cracking down on other insurgency groups, but instead they doubled down on supporting them, and the terrorist attacks in Pakistan increased. This Palestinian Taliban group, also known as the TTP, their main aim is to overthrow the democratic Pakistani government and impose hardline Islamic law. Since 2007, they've allegedly implemented hundreds of attacks, even attacking Pakistani air bases. Pakistan say they have a safe haven in Afghanistan. Pakistanis also typically think of Afghans as, well, terrorists, people who want to divide and tear up their country using violent means. Even if we were to take out the historical and the ethnic tensions, there's also many economic grievances between the two groups. In the western border province of the KPK and Baluchistan, Afghans are known for smuggling entire containers full of goods from Afghanistan, and not only does this give them a poor moral reputation, but local Pakistani small business owners who have to pay taxes are forced out of business by this black market. And thus, on 16 December 2014, when there was an attack on a Pakistani public school that killed 132 children, an unprecedented assault which was claimed by the Pakistani Taliban, when the people started to voice their anger at the government and at this ethnic minority of the Afghans, a minority where over 1 million are undocumented immigrants. What's the politically expedient thing to do? Well, the Pakistani government started saying that the Afghan nationals residing within Pakistan were the facilitators, which compelled the government to introduce an anti-terrorism action plan, which involved indiscriminately raiding Afghan communities and refugee camps and repatriating them back into Afghanistan when possible. They also used subtler methods, including asking landlords to not renew rental contracts, taking breadwinners into custody, holding them hostage arbitrarily until their families decided to pack up their bags and leave voluntarily. All of this was very popular among the Pakistani. This latest threat of deporting 1.7 million people, according to the government, was a response to their claim that 14 out of the 24 suicide bombings in Pakistan this year were by Afghan nationals, and the massive migration that happened recently after the previous Afghan regime fell in 2021 was also a key contributor of introducing all these people to the country. So what we have here is the Pakistani people who have a huge historical and also many recent grievances against the Afghan people. We also have a hugely unpopular Pakistani government who have not only just arrested everyone's favourite reformer, Imran Khan, but has also driven the economy to the ground and failed to respond adequately to the devastating floods last year, have delayed elections, and are now also responsible for massive security failures as seen by the recent attacks. What's the most politically expedient thing to do? Well, it's to be seen to be doing something, expelling millions of undocumented Afghans. This also has the convenient side effect of pressuring the Taliban regime, who administer the poorest country on earth and can't possibly afford to take in all these migrants. And maybe they'll start to rethink about their support for the TTP and committing further terror attacks. The Taliban have responded, saying it's a human rights violation what Pakistan is doing, for this is injustice, and injustice that cannot be ignored in any way. The forced expulsion of people is in conflict with all the norms of good neighbourliness. I can't pronounce that word. And it appears to have worked. Due to international pressures, Pakistan has called off their plans for now. Thanks for listening.